So the Warhammer Fest reveals are here, and there's some pretty solid good news for the Chaos Space Marines. There's a huge raft of new model kits coming in, no less than 6 new kits for the faction. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking about the Warhammer Fest reveals. There's really quite a lot of exciting stuff being shown off. I thought I'd make a few focused videos on each subject and start with the absolute biggest and baddest news, and that's the new influx of kits for Chaos Marines. As expected from all the teasers and rumours, this preview is incredibly warp spawn heavy. I'd say the headline act for the reveals are these new enormous embiggened possessed models. The new Daemon Prince sculpt that we've already seen bits of, but now there's a whole lot of 40k stuff revealed for it too. And then the rest of the releases really flesh out the Mortal Followers line of Chaos Space Marines, a nice proper updated Cultist kit, 2 sets of mutated Cultist of progressive weirdness, and a Cultist HQ and command section if you want something to lead a hefty contingent of mutants and freaks into battle. Loads of cool stuff if you're a follower of the Dark Gods, so let's jump through them one by one. First up, here we have the new Possessed, one of the kits that was rumoured to be coming on that big rumour compendium, and it has turned out to be right once again. I'd say the old Possessed kit isn't a terribly bad one by 40k standards, but at first impressions I do like these rather a lot more than the previous, just horrifically twisted fusions of demons and Chaos Space Marines. The one on the left is standing on a rent-apart Primaris Marine. He's got a whole load of chitinous appendages sprouting from his right arm and weird sort of backward jointed legs. The next one appears to be armed with a snapping claw and some sort of gun contraption, which makes me wonder whether or not they might have a ranged option in the kit for once. That'd be an interesting small quirky rules update if there is something that actually gives them better abilities in game. Then we've got a rather big chunky guy with horns, hooves and a chainsword. Then a guy who appears to have his backpack prongs set on fire, and his left arm seems to have been warped into some sort of demonic flesh blade, not the sort of thing that I want to get hit by myself. And the last one is perhaps one of the weirdest of the entire lot. He's got a grab claw, some sort of bony club thing, a whole bunch of tentacles, and prongs emerging from his fleshy backpack. Perhaps the main thing about these things is that they're a lot bigger than the previous Possessed. There were rumours in the Codex that they would be basically the size of the Greater Possessed, and the Greater Possessed stat line would sort of become the normal Possessed one. There's a few shots in other images that show them decently higher than standard Chaos Terminators right now. They're perhaps more on par with Space Marine Gravis Marines, and they're supposedly going to be having strength and toughness 5 in-game, plus a serious amount of scary attacks. As you might expect, they've got a whole load of different options. Apparently you're going to be able to build quite a lot of different builds and not just these ones. I'm sure once you add in conversion potential for these guys, there's going to be a crazy amount of stuff that you can achieve. I do wonder with the new bigger stat lines and improved models whether or not there might be some errata for say Death Guard Possessed. It'll be interesting to see if they gain much bigger and beefier stats. It could be something a bit more interesting to differentiate them further from say standard Plague Marines. In any case, I think they've executed this one quite well. I think that these guys are going to be popular. Next up, and a release that's kind of long overdue, is a new big box of 10 Cultists, rather than the 5-man box that the Chaos Marine players have been having to make do with for ages. Kind of surprising that they haven't got round to releasing a standalone kit in all this time. These guys' aesthetic is a lot more in keeping with the Blackstone Fortress Cultists that came out with the Servants of the Abyss, and they really are quite nice little models, really quite generic chaosy looking, and not really directly affiliated with any one god. The guys that we've got here are all armed with auto pistols and close combat weapons. Hopefully they'll retain options within the kit to give them ranged weapons and equip them all with auto guns as an alternative, but in any case this really does plug a decent gap in the Chaos army. Quite nice to be able to get an actual decent number of chaff from the official source. Next they've opted for 2 different sizes of Accursed Cultists. This appears to be what happens when your Chaos Rebellion gets going in serious form and the gods start to take interest in mere mortals, giving them all sorts of fun appendages and additional improvements. If you're a mere mortal and not a mighty Chaos Space Marine, the mutations tend to be a little bit more haphazard and evolving you into a mindless freak, as opposed to being any sort of useful improvements, I guess. But apparently these things will still hit significantly harder than standard cultists when they get to melee. It'll be interesting to see how they compare against standard cultists and whether or not they're also going to be a troops choice. As we're seeing just the 5 of them shown off, it does look like they're going to be released like this in a box of 5. Just from the look of the models, I would suspect that these guys aren't going to have as many posability options compared with the others. They do look a little bit more monopose to me, but I guess we'll see. I kind of feel like these guys are going to be quite expensive for the points. Basically normal troops with a few minor twisted mutations. I don't think they're likely to cost very many points in game, but a new Games Workshop plastic kit with 5 models is very unlikely to be very cheap at all. I suppose at least if you're willing to do a bit of kit bashing, then creating yourself a whole host of these might not be the hardest thing in the world. The one theme is that they're all weird and different, so I don't see why it would be so hard to create your own, I guess. Moving on to the next level of Chaos Devolution though, we have these Accursed Cultist Torments. According to some of the league's rules, these will be able to be fielded within the same squad as the regular Accursed Cultist, and the fact that they seem to have previewed them separately kind of implies that they might be their own standalone release. I guess to be honest, if they were in the same box as the regular Accursed Cultists, it might not necessarily be the worst thing in the world. At least then you'd be getting a fairly meaty amount of plastic for the investment. These things really are weird to the next level though. Humans that have been possessed by demonic warp spawn, to the extent where the demonic warp spawn really does seem to be the thing in charge now, not the human. It almost looks like a demon that's manifested in the mortal planes, and the actual human just seems to be a hanging on afterthought, while the demon jumps around and does what it likes. The thing in the bottom left has a bit of a classic demonic-like face, looks a little bit Balrog maybe. It's walking on pronged spindly claws. The next one appears to be some sort of weird gargoyle thing with wings. The poor human in the middle of it just has his arms and legs dropping out at random parts. Then the last thing seems to be some sort of hulking demonic ape-like thing, mainly dominated by just one enormous arm that it's walking on. He seems to have attached a few blades to his human co-host to help him walk a bit more evenly. Overall, these things are super freaky. They look like they're perhaps halfway between regular humans and Chaos Spawn. I sort of don't really see why you couldn't field these as Chaos Spawn if you wanted to. That does seem to be basically what they are. Just in terms of rules rumours for these new models, supposedly the big ones will be Strength 5, Toughness 4 and have AP-2 melee. The little ones will be Strength and Toughness 4 and just AP-1 in melee. I have a feeling that they're both going to be fairly cheap expendable units, maybe in a similar sort of vein to the Spawn. They perhaps might move a little bit slower as well, and so it'll be interesting to see how the two compare. Also in the leagues, as we mentioned, apparently Possessed are going to be Strength 5 and have AP-2 and Damage 2 melee, so pretty capable of tearing Space Marines into little pieces. Next up, we have the rumoured Cultist Command Squad. These guys call themselves the Dark Commune, representing a shadowy cabal of powerful individuals who've masterminded the Chaos Uprising on a planet. We've got 2 shadowy masked individuals with swords who perhaps wouldn't look out of place at all in fantasy. One fairly heavily mutated gentleman with an enormous demonic standard breathing fire. A leader or prophet guy with a mutated staff. And then some chap who appears to be just a floating head attached to some dark technology, which appears to be parasiting off some other guy's body. I'm not entirely sure what's going on with that guy, but at least it looks like he's having a good time. The squad's apparently going to be a new Chaos Space Marine HQ choice, so if you want to field entire detachments of nothing but cultists, that looks like it could be a possibility now. Say if you wanted to ally a whole force of Chaos Cultists and Renegades, to say something like a force of Chaos Demons or Death Guard. The names for the people are the Cult Demagogue Leader, the Mind Witch Psyker, the Icon Rack, who I guess is carrying the great big flaming standard, and then 2 Blessed Blades, fairly dangerous looking melee bodyguards who look like they should be able to hack down some heavy infantry if they're threatened. Overall, it looks like quite a cool little set of miniatures to have in the midst of a vast cultist throng. Finally for Chaos Marines, we have a Daemon Prince. We saw this guy unveiled the other week as the leaked model from the Slaves to Darkness one for Fantasy. It was kind of expected that he'd have bits for 40k as well, and overall I am really quite impressed with the amounts of bits and options that they've got for this guy. On this model, if you don't opt for the wings, then you can see that you can gain the Chaos Space Marine type backpack, swollen up to monstrous proportions. It's got the option of being armed with a big Hellforged sword, axe or talon in that right arm, and it looks like you can field his second hand either armed with a standard talon, or you can take something that looks a bit like a Kai gun. I think they gave it the profile for a warp bolter back in 8th edition. He's also got a lot more Chaos Space Marine-esque shoulder pauldrons as well, and you can see one of his alternate heads here compared with the one that we saw the other week. They have shown off a few other options here. The one on the left you can see is armed with a pair of malefic talons. The one on the right I think was the one that we saw the other week, armed with the great big axe and the wings. And then on the Warhammer community page they also showed off the 4 different heads that you can equip them with. I really like the way that they've given one for each devotion of God. It can be an angry corn minotaur beast thing, a slobbering beast of Nurgle with an enormous tongue, a bird-like 4-eyed avian Tzeentch Demon Prince, and a weird Slaaneshi sort of goat beast thing with a whole load of horns and what looks like earrings and a tongue piercing. That means at least 6 different head choices overall. which I think is fairly impressive for a kit of this size. Overall, I think it's a rather good haul for Chaos Space Marines. There's going to be a fair amount of new and updated units in the book, looking forward to reviewing them when we get further rules for them. I think the only other possibilities that were fairly heavily rumoured but we haven't seen here are updated sculpts for the Chaos Bikes and a rumoured update for Huron Blackheart, both of which I think are perfectly possible that we might see realised before the Codex comes out. Finally, they have confirmed that World Eaters aren't in the Codex. They are going to be getting their standalone rules, as we'll talk about fairly shortly in another video. Let me know what you think of the models though down in the comments below. Would any of these weird mutated freaks tempt you into starting a Chaos army? Or will they provide some decent reinforcement for one that's already established? If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll be doing a couple more on the subject of the 40k previews, and I'll certainly keep up with any news of the Chaos Space Marine books and review the Codex in full once it releases. Finally, if you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, which you can find down in the video description. If you've been enjoying a lot, any support is enormously appreciated, as that is the main way that I can afford to keep these videos coming quite so regularly. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.